and the Vermont Humanities. This is our fall festival snapshot program, Deep Roots and Strong Branches, American Abenaki Narratives and Healing with Vera Longtoshian. Each year, Vermont Humanities hosts a Fall Festival of Arts and Humanities Month. This year's theme of 50 Years Forward looks at the many challenges facing our communities and highlights moments of celebration as we move forward into a critical time period to create a more welcoming and resilient state. Learn more at vermonthumanities.org for more information about the festival and snapshot events happening across the state. The sponsor of our entire snapshot season is the Vermont Department of Libraries, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and the Alma Gibbs Donchian Foundation. As far as Brownell, we just kicked off our strategic planning process, and we have, if anybody, whether you're from here or away, there are surveys if you're interested in libraries and helping us plan for the next 5 years. We'd appreciate your feedback. It's also available on our website, brownelllibrary.org, and available at our desks. I also wanted to mention the next Snapshot program is hosted by Junction Arts and Media with Vermont cartoonist laureate Tilly Walden on November 7th at 7 p.m. Please be sure to register online to receive the link for the live stream. We've passed out index cards. If you have questions, if you could just write down the question on the index cards, and they'll be collected for questions after Vera speaks. And I now wanted to introduce our speaker. Vera Longtoshian is an educator, artist, and the executive director of the Vermont Abenaki Artists Association, where their work includes curating dynamic exhibitions and engaging programs about regional culture. Vera also serves as secretary for Vermont Humanities. Previously, Vera worked at the National Museum of the American Indian and served on the State Act 1 committee dealing with ethnic studies and social equity in schools. They earned their MALS from SUNY Empire State College, where they also earned their BA in Native American Studies and Museum Studies. Please join me in welcoming Vera.
Hello, friends. I'm excited to be here with you tonight. We have a lot of interesting things to talk about. And before we get started, I'd like to give a verbal description of myself. And as I move through the program, I'm going to do my best to try and give some descriptions of the slides that we're going to be looking at as well. So I'm kind of short, I'm heavy, I have salt and pepper curly hair just a little past my shoulders, brown eyes, and I'm wearing glasses. I have a blue shirt, and I'm wearing a black jacket and pants. With that, let's get started with our cover slide, Deep Roots, Strong Branches, American Abenaki Narratives and Healing. And on this front slide, there's a picture, it's an outdoor scene, and it's looking up into the tall branches of a tree. And tonight I'm going to be speaking with you about the strength and resiliency of the Abenaki people and celebrating the vibrancy of culture that perseveres and continues to this very day. So this program is going to be weaving together a lot of different materials and several different disciplines, and we're going to be exploring several different topics. It's divided up into 4 sections, and the titles of the sections are on the slide. First, we're going to be looking at collecting Indigenous narratives. Then we're going to be looking at the Beyond the Curve exhibition, and then Deep Roots, Strong Branches. And the last section we're going to look at is Healing Through the Arts. And we're starting with a map of the Abenaki homelands. It starts in Massachusetts, goes up through Vermont and New Hampshire. It's a topographical map, so you can also see the mountains, the valleys, the flatlands, and the rivers, and the lakes that were the highways, how people navigated and moved around the state before highways. And it also has a list of many different names of communities that make up the historic names of communities that make up the current Abenaki people today. So I think I'm not going to read them all off, but the main point here is that today there is this general catch-all phrase Abenaki that's used, but the community was made of many different communities that came together. People would move fluidly between one community and another community and be equal parts of each of those communities. And a lot of that is tracked through Lisa Brooks' work, My Beloved Kin. So if you want to read more or learn more, take a look at that book. Okay. The other thing that's really important as we get started is also to talk about the idea that the Abenaki never had a centralized government. Each community governed itself. It had its own sovereignty and was in charge of whatever they had going on internally. Not to say there weren't group gatherings where everybody got together to consult, but I think these ideas are really important because those ideas come right into today. So we're starting with the storytelling project, which is the section that was called Collecting Indigenous Narratives. And this is a project that started during the pandemic after everything opened up again. And we were thinking about how important this time in history is and the idea of us being able to record our own history. And so that was the beginning of it. And at about the same time, the Vermont Department of Health contacted us. And they were asking us, were there about disparities that were being experienced, and were people able to access health care? What were the perceptions on different things relating to health care? So as we were putting together the Abenaki Storytelling Project, we came up with this goal. Using storytelling and art as primary tools of formative assessment, qualitative and Indigenous methods, VAA, which is the Vermont Abenaki Artists Association, will gain insights on COVID vaccine-related perceptions, disparities, and access. And that was really important as we move in and through this, that you're going to notice that when we work on projects, there's a lot of crowdsourcing and working with the community and a lot of flexibility. And you may have noticed on the cover slide and also on this slide, there is a little graphic that says no photography, no video recording. Today we have the Media Factory with us, and they are doing the official recording for tonight. And this is here also to respect the wishes of people that took place in this project that is still ongoing, and to maintain confidentiality for folks. Uh-oh. Sorry, we flipped to the end. Let's see if we can't get back to the beginning. Okay, there we go. So the confidentiality, no recordings, no video as per people's requests. Some people said, yes, you can record everything, you can do video, you can do audio, and other people didn't want it recorded in any other way than with notes. And another cultural challenge we faced was building trust. Even though it was an Abenaki organization running the project, there were still, there are so many different Abenaki communities. Some are recognized by the state in Vermont, and some aren't. And also there are Abenaki tribes in New Hampshire that aren't recognized. And of course, there are Abenaki tribes in Canada as well. So part of that was building trust with the different communities. And part of how we did that, the image on the left is an outdoor gathering at a cultural event where we set up tables with art supplies, and that's how we were reaching out to people. We had some prompts that we wrote down. We also had all of these art supplies, and people could either respond to the prompts in writing, or they could create like a piece, process drawings, technical drawings, and things like that. There was also a call to artists for more fine art, and we'll see a couple of those pieces in just a minute. And then people that opted to could also do individual storytelling sessions. So when we talk about narratives and storytelling, we're not necessarily talking about storytelling like stories that have been passed down generation to generation about certain characters or aspects that are general knowledge within communities, but we're talking about often individual family stories that were passed down. And really, we thought we were going to collect stories about COVID, but something happened during these interviews where people just started opening up and telling us their life stories, their family histories, and things like that. So we started covering deep time, which was really fantastic, interesting, and sometimes a little bit, it caused some nervousness and anxiety at times because there were some uncharted territories, not just for the participants, but also for our team, because this was a new way of being. And as a result of this storytelling project, we heard from a lot of people about inequities in all different aspects of health, whether it was their access to health care. It could have been not having support they needed, people to talk to, and so many different things. Sometimes it was food insecurity. Sometimes the health issues had to do with not being represented in education programs, in exhibits and history books and things of that nature. So what ended up happening is, as a result of this project, we also developed a health equity team called Walawozi Health and Wellness. And Walawozi is basically how we say, be very well. And the logo that's pictured on this screen has a couple of hands kind of crossed with the fingers interwoven with each other, and it has fish and corn and a double curved design that's very common in Abenaki artwork. And so after spending about a year and a half talking to people, we started thinking about the project, the deliverable. How will we share this with the community? How will we share this with the world? And that was an ongoing conversation throughout the project, like how do people want this shared? So I'm going to show you just a little bit of that. The exhibit was called Beyond the Curve, the American Abenaki COVID Experience. The name of the slide is, the name of the picture is on this slide, as is the cover image. The background color on the left hand is orange with the text of the name of the exhibit. And on the right-hand side, the color is reversed, so there's a black background, and there's a piece of gourd art. If you're not familiar with gourds, they might grow in a garden. They're sort of in the pumpkin squashish family. And Jean Morningstar Kent, the piece of art she created for this had 3 different panels, and the panel that's shown on this is a hug between her and her sister, whom she lost during the pandemic. And we're developing a digital exhibit, so some of this will be commemorated through time. And the next slide, this is a piece of artwork that was created by a very young artist, and they wish to remain anonymous in presentations, so I'm not going to say their name. This piece of artwork is called Bear Womb Cave, and the overall shape of the artwork is round, and then it sort of has these wings or hands coming out the bottom. And it has black shaded hands that sort of are coming around hugging. When I look at this, I see a mother's belly, a very pregnant mother's belly. And so there are some crossed lines that sort of resemble stretch marks and things like that. And at the bottom, there are bears painted in black, and there are some fish coming to the side. And this is representing the generations of this young person's family that are alive since eugenics. So they still have grandparents that have living memories of that era. And eugenics will be one of the topics that will come up as we start going through more content in just a minute. And another piece of artwork that was created was this gorgeous, gorgeous piece called COVID Confederacy. And it takes a historic map of homelands, and it has torn train tickets. When you board a train in the old days, you used to have paper tickets that were made out of like a cover stock, and they would tear them as you got on board. And so it has some of those tickets with the names of different towns where families would travel back and forth to. And this is representing how freely Abenaki families used to be able to travel across the borders from Canada into the United States, from the United States into Canada, from Vermont into New Hampshire into Massachusetts, and vice versa. And there are also 4 quadrants in there with a double curve design that represents important gatherings, but this design is sort of torn apart because this is happening during COVID when people aren't allowed to freely travel. And this piece was created by Nathan Johnson. So we created the exhibit Beyond the Curve to represent kind of some of the stories and common themes that came up during the storytelling project. And I think what became very obvious is one exhibit couldn't tell all of those stories. And I'll take that a little bit further and not just call them stories, but oral histories, and melding them together with written history, seeing how they're documented in other ways. So this exhibit was wonderful, and as I said, it will be digital, but we had to take it a little bit further. And we're moving into the next section, which is Deep Roots, Strong Branches, which is our current exhibit that we had on view this season at Lake Champlain Maritime Museum. And it's going to stay there for another season as we continue to develop it before it begins to travel to other museums over the next couple of years. And on this slide, we have an image from a book that I have on the table up front, if anyone would like to see it later. And what the image is, it's a nighttime scene where a hunter has gone out and there are snowshoe tracks in the snow. You can see the moon is rising, the darkness of the sky and trees, and alongside the hunter, the dog footprints in the snow. And next to it, it says, Deep Roots, Strong Branches. Abenaki people have lived in Indakina, our homeland, for more than 12,000 years. Abenaki culture is a complex network of people, places, relationships, and ceremonies that link the people with the living land. And that's the basic idea for this exhibit that's starting to travel that we're going to talk about tonight. I wanted to give you some background information so you would know where these ideas come from, and they are community sourced, and I think that's really important. Whenever you do anything with Native American communities, the source communities need to have access to the materials, the data, anything that comes out of it, and it has to be representative of whatever main themes and ideas they want. So I want to uplift that idea. Now we're going to look at some gallery views from the exhibit, and these are views at Lake Champlain Maritime Museum, and most of the photos we're going to be looking at were taken by the Vermont Abenaki Artists Association. On this slide, we have an image of 2 pieces of artwork in a windowsill, but there's like a white filter in the background. The first piece of art is an anonymous piece of art, once again, and it's called Corn Mother. And the second piece is actually a poster with varieties of Wabanaki corn. So first we're going to look at Corn Mother. And Corn Mother was originally a pen and ink drawing that has since been digitized and is reprinted. And what we see is an Indigenous woman standing with her arms holding a bundle of modern varieties of corn. Above her head, almost in a giant halo formation, there's an infinity-style spiral in black and white. And then on the sides, there are hands that come in that are almost like spirit hands. And you'll see very tiny little corn in there. And that represents the earliest corn varieties that came from the south and were slowly worked their way across the continent until we got them. And the poster we're going to look at is going to show us some of those varieties of corn and how the corn changed over time. But when we think of this corn mother, the original story that goes with the corn mother, I'm not going to tell you the long version, but basically the story is about the mother's sacrifice. Her children were starving, and she knew something had to be sacrificed, and she ends up asking, and this may not align with American cultural values today, but this is how it is. And we have to take it for what it is as we talk about some of these things. So she asked her husband to sacrifice her. And she gets dragged through the fields, not because he wants to. You know, he cries, he doesn't want to sacrifice his wife, but they know it's the only way their children are going to survive. And her sacrifice, her blood in the fields, fertilizes the fields so that they can propagate more corn to feed the children. So that's the story that goes behind this picture of Corn Mother. And corn is celebrated annually every year through a green corn feast and other corn celebrations that happen toward the close of summer. And some of the things that happen during those celebrations is you might hear the story of the Corn Mother, you might hear the song that goes with that. Sometimes there are public events that you can attend. There was one at Fort Number 4 in Charleston, New Hampshire this year. And sometimes they're closed and only for the community, depending on what the events are going to be. And the food during the feasting is usually different types of corn dishes, a hominy or corn soup, and corn on the cob, that type of thing. Maybe cornbreads. So this artist was really wanting to capture that moment, that story, to help Corn Mother to live on into the future. And then now we have a close-up of this poster that has images of various different types of corn, starting all the way from the right-hand side. I'm hoping it's on your side. No, it's on the opposite on the screen behind me. Sorry. So sorry for that. Starting with the Gaspee corn, which is teeny tiny. It's only a couple of inches. Then the Tom Thumb popcorn, which is a little bit bigger. And then the Abenaki rose corn, which is a little bit bigger. And then the Callus corn, which is a little bit smaller. And then finally, the Callus flint corns. The flint corns are harder corns. If you're going to eat them, they need lots and lots of boiling. They're not as readily, you're not going to jump and want to eat them right away. However, when you look at the Callus corns, we've raised Callus corn, and they're literally, I guess, about the little pieces of corn are only like 3 inches tall, sometimes 4 inches, so they're pretty teeny tiny. And the little kernels are like half of my pinky fingernail. That's how tiny they are, and it's very irregular. So when you look at these corns, it's not necessarily always pretty, the way we think of corn today, but these corns are the staples that fed Abenaki people for so long. And some of these corns had disappeared, as sometimes because of the way family moved, sometimes through migration, sometimes through war and different things like that. And the Callus corn is one of the corns that was actually gifted to a family that settled in the region. And after a long time of not having it anymore, it was re-gifted back to the Callus community. So these corns that sustain us, they don't just sustain our community, they've been sustaining the general New England community for a long time. And these posters, there is a whole series of them out of the Haven Project that represent all the different types of food varieties and stuff. So if you want to learn more about food, you can look up Seeds of Renewal. And that was a project that Fred Wiseman did, where he was gathering the different seeds again. And many Abenaki people grow seeds, heirloom seeds, for plants that haven't been harvested or grown in this area for a long time. Let me grab a sip of water. Once again on this slide, all these gallery views are going to have the same text at the top of the slide saying Deep Roots, Strong Branches, Gallery View with the name of the museum. And this next slide, once again, in a different window, we're looking at some clothing. There's a man's jacket from pre-1920, long woman's dress, pre-1920s, and both of them are made out of like a canvasy kind of material. It's a tan color. The woman's dress has some geometric designs on it. And we're not going to focus too much on the woman's dress. I'm going to do a little animation here, and hopefully it's going to work. And so also on this slide, there's a picture of a beaded bag we're going to look at. And then there's a small pair of children's moccasins, which we're not really going to talk about this time around. But maybe I'll talk to you again next year in the exhibit space. So I'm starting with the bag on the bottom row sitting on the windowsill. And it's actually on the book cover. I'll hold up the book while I'm at it. If anybody wants to thumb through the books, we have some of the books up here. And you can look at the gorgeous beadwork in it. So the image on the cover of the book. Some people call this a tulip bag or a thistle bag because the bag is in the shape of a tulip. And it's a dark colored velvet with beadwork in shades of blues, yellows, whites, and there's also a white sunflower in the middle. It's a raised type beadwork, so it has a little bit more of a texture. It's not just beadwork sewn down that melts into the pile of the velvet. And this piece has a local Connecticut River provenance from 1840. And the moccasins, which I didn't mention, they have a radiant leaf design on them, which is very important in a lot of beadwork. And we also see it at the top edge of the beadwork. There are those leaf designs there. So that's a reoccurring regional design that was in this region probably through the end of the 1800s into the 1900s. On this next slide, there is a blow-up of the man's tunic or top that is very small in the windowsill. So that way you can see it up close. And this one is interesting because it has a very, very local provenance. So it's probably from within a few miles of where we stand right now. It's actually from Essex Junction, and it belonged to a basket maker. The dating on this is about 1910 to 1920. Once again, it's a tan canvas with handmade red velvet panels decorated with Niagara-style beadwork. And as we talk about this, to be clear, we're not saying an Abenaki person made this piece, but this was worn by an Abenaki basket maker when they were selling their wares. So there are these styles of clothes that are made on this tan canvasy kind of material that sort of represents or is similar to buckskins. And during this time, you have to remember earlier on, there were Wild West shows, and people used to really think of all Native American people as this stereotype. Some of them, that hasn't changed so greatly. So what happened during this period was Abenaki basket makers were wearing clothes that would help people recognize them as Native American. And there were actually companies that made these outfits and sold them. And they weren't necessarily always created by Native people. However, there's an Abenaki community member who also has an Onondaga grandmother that did some of the beadwork that was then also sold pretty widely. So there are some interesting connections. So as we're talking about basket making, this is Chief Don Stevens of the Nulhegan tribe. I don't know if you've probably seen him on the news plenty of times. And in this image, he's pretty jolly, he's happy. We had a press conference about a year ago where various community members, culture bearers, were telling their family stories of continuity of culture, of traditions that their family carried, and in a lot of cases still carry. And here is Chief Don Stevens holding two baskets that are about palm-sized for him because he has very big hands, and these baskets are only, they would probably fill my hands, but they look lost in his hands. And he's talking about his family's basket-making traditions. His family was referred to, I'm going to use words tonight that we don't use today, and I'm going to ask for apologies for that in advance, but it's important that people hear these and witness these words and know that this is a part of our history. And it's a part of history that has harmed a lot of people, and that intergenerational trauma is still present. And I just want to say that before we start diving into this. So his family was referred to as gypsies, not because they're from another place. They were called that because they were wanderers, and they were Abenaki basket makers, and they actually traveled in wagons, town to town. They went up and down what the little highways are today, back before they were highways, and they would be selling their wares. There's a new picture I just became aware of like 2 days ago, so I didn't have time to put it in this slideshow, but it's actually a historic photograph from 1908 that says, "Outlawed gypsies." And I was like, oh my gosh. And we found the connection to the families that still have that history. And there's a newspaper article we also have from New Hampshire during that era that talks about the gypsy basket makers are selling their baskets, you know, and they're staying at Tewksbury Farm and stuff like that. So gypsy was a word that was used to describe Abenaki people, and we're going to see it in some written records in just a moment. Chief Don has also spoken very publicly about the Vermont Eugenics Survey. And there's a lot of controversy surrounding eugenics. Some people tried to deny it happened. Some people tried to deny it involved the Abenaki. And I should start, I think it's common knowledge, I hope by now, that eugenics and the science behind it, it's a pseudoscience. It was not real. And a lot of horrible things were done to families. And this is an image, it was a poster, and it has a large tree on it, and written under the branches and below and above the roots, it says, "Eugenics is self-direction of human evolution." And underneath the image, it says, "Like a tree, eugenics draws its materials from many sources and organizes them into harmonious is that edity? I'm sorry, it's small print. I'm trying, thank you. And in the roots, there are these words that are different disciplines that we think of. And in Native American communities, these words are considered to be dirty words. So sometimes we just call them bad words. And when you talk to other Native nations, they have similar feelings about even ideas of research. Research is often considered to be a dirty word, and not just locally. In any case, in the roots, we see different disciplines like biology, genetics, psychology, mental testing, and I'm not going to go reading through all of them, but they're common disciplines we still see in schools today. So that's sort of the introduction to talking about eugenics, and let's go a little bit further. So after the eugenics survey sort of fell out of favor, people were starting to realize, oh, that's not such a great idea. The Vermont Commission on Country Life started doing additional research on families. And I need to point out how earlier I was talking about the COVID project that we did, we were doing with permission and with confidentiality if people want confidentiality in all of this. It's really important that when we look at these citizenship cards, that we understand that all of this research was done without permission. And a little verbal description of this, the image on this slide, it's an old-fashioned cover stock, sort of like a cover stock piece of paper, like half a sheet of paper. At the top it says citizenship survey, and it goes through demographical information, and one of the things in your town and age and things like that, it also has race, nationality, religion, your political association, what magazines you read, and things like that. And I'm just going to pull out just a little bit of information. I didn't want to show entire cards with people's information on it. So I'm going to share just a little bit of a peek where I used the little snippy tool, and I took out just the line that says race and nationality. And there are some interesting outputs here. And once again, this is not the families filling out these cards. The one at the top says the race is white, but the nationality is French and Indian. At this time, in the state archives, shouldn't say never, because it might be, but you generally will not see a tribal affiliation. It's a way of dehumanizing people to just say Indian. And also, Indian is a legal term, which we can talk about on another day, but we don't have time for that today. The next person is listed as white, and then they do a blood quantum breakdown. Blood quantum is and once again, this is an entirely different talk. It's another way of dehumanizing people by breaking them down by their different ancestries and so forth. And it says the percentage, this person is Indian, the percentage they are French Canadian, the percentage they are Scottish, the percentage they are Anglo-Saxon. And this may be a little shocking, but once again, truth needs to be seen because there are people that are trying to hide these things. We're going to look at another one, and this is an interesting one. It says white, question mark, under race. Then it says red, question mark. And then next to it, it says nationality, French Canadian. So with that one, there's almost an assumption that French Canadians are also Indian. And the one that says white, looking at white question mark, red question mark, the person obviously didn't know how to classify a person under the survey. And then we have another one that has no race, and it just lists a person as Indian. And that person was at the time on their card was listed as a part-time resident. So they weren't even living in Vermont full-time. And when we talk about the survey, the eugenics survey, and all of this information, and we're not going to really get into too much of the details, but a lot of the organizations that were complicit in the eugenics movement were the Vermont Commission on Country Life, because we're looking at their forms, University of Vermont, Vermont Board of Health, Vermont Industrial School, and I don't even have a complete list with me, but I just wrote down some names to read off. The Vermont State Prison, Vermont State Hospital for the Insane, Vermont State School for the Feeble-Minded, Vermont Children's Aid, Brandon Training School. And also another name that comes up often in these records is St. Joseph's. So I don't know if anybody has heard about that, but a lot of children ended up in the care of St. Joseph's. And when we think about eugenics in that time period, the term we hear over and over again is forced sterilization. It's so much more than forced sterilization. The people that end up in these institutions were abused in ways you can't even imagine. Some were sterilized. Right now, the sterilization certificates that are available are not complete because they can't make them public till after the person passes. So each year as people pass on that were survivors, more names will slowly come forward. I'm sorry, I have to take a breath. And when people are institutionalized, a lot of these people were institutionalized, and when you look at the records, and I once again, I apologize for using this word, these are words out of the records. They, in addition to feeble-minded, they use the word degenerate, and I'm sorry, I can't even go into all the words right now. But when people are institutionalized, it separates families. So many children were taken away from their families. They may have lost their father, who was the breadwinner, who supported the family, and a lot of changes happen. And you have all these kids that are basically in the care of brutal institutions. And so when we talk about the harm isn't just from the sterilizations, but also all of these children that were taken away from their families. And it wasn't just quote unquote Indian people, it was also people with disabilities and people from other marginalized communities. And I think the other thing we have to take into consideration that people also have intersectional identity. So you could be quote unquote Indian and you might also be Black, and you might also be disabled and in the poor category, because the poor farm often has many different records. I read a record where basically Harriet Abbott, who was part of the survey with Henry Perkins, she wrote to the poor farm asking to get information on more information about a person's family and what can you tell us. And when you see the reply from the organization, they were like, sorry, we don't know anything. So I think there were also people at the time that were trying to protect people in their families also. And now we're going to be starting to look at some of the little snippets from records that are in the Vermont State Archive in different pedigree files and different family folders. They kept genealogies on families, and those genealogies and those folders also included everything they thought was wrong with that family would be checked off. How many people have this problem or that problem or this problem according to this research. And the names are redacted here. This is actually a screenshot. On March 20th, the Vermont Truth and Reconciliation Commission they've been showing emblematic cases that represent that time period. And Adam Kirsch, who was their lead researcher at the time, did a presentation on this. And once again, the names are redacted, and I'm going to read this snippet, and I'll just say blank where the name was. It says, I will, however, at this time state that blank's mother's name was blank, or blank. That blank came of what was known as and in quotes, gypsy family, which was part Negro, part French, and part Indian. And the blank family have appeared over and over again in the courts and state institutions in Vermont and also in New York State to such an extent that we felt it was worthwhile to investigating them. So, and there's this Adam underlined in red known as a gypsy. And it also talks about the identities and stuff. And I don't know if you've heard of the book Vermont for Vermonters by Mercedes DeGuardiola. There's a quote in her book where she says, discrimination played a definite role, Those who could pass as white usually chose to do so. Authorities themselves sometimes classified family members as different races based on skin color instead of by family. Though when it came down to the question of degeneracy, non-white ancestry was often quickly remembered. Once again, take a deep breath before we go a little bit further. And here we're looking at a second folder where they're reaching out to a school to find out about a family, and this is up in Swanton. And here the information is coming from Mr. Bartu, who's the principal of the high school in Essex Junction. Pretty close to where we are, wow. So how far is that from here? Here? Like, where's the high school? Like a block away? Yeah. That's what I meant, like the proximity. So that feels pretty live. In any case, so they were looking for more information. Once again, I'm going to read out loud so folks can hear it. Names are redacted, and at the bottom it says, Mr. Bartu says that Back Bay, Swanton was settled by the French when they thought they were settling in Canada. The result is a French and Indian mixture. He says that the St. Francis Indians are French and Indian mixture. And so I'm not an expert. I'm not pretending to be. I just want to bring some of these things to your attention because it came up over and over again in the work that we've been doing. And if you want to learn more, there are these really good books out there. Mercedes DeGuardiola's book, Vermonters, The History of Eugenics in Green Mountain State, which just recently came out, and also Breeding Better Vermonters, The Eugenics Project in the Green Mountain State by Nancy Gallagher. And then we're going to bring this down a bit. And we're coming back into the exhibit. This is a view of the gallery on another wall. And verbal descriptions, there's a window all the way to the left and a window all the way to the right that have photographs in them from families that are hunting and fishing. I guess I'm going to have to point it out because my left and my right is a little messed up here. But if we come in over here in your left window, the top image is of an Abenaki fishing camp just after the turn of the century. And I can't show you the entire picture, sadly, but basically showing how these traditions still exist. And on the wall, there is a fishing spear. There are, in a picture frame, there are harpoons and spears and traditional fish hooks made out of moose bone as they would have been made a long time ago. And of course, people continue to hunt and fish today. And we're going to come back to the storytelling project. We're coming full circle now. This is an image of an Ohegan citizen with his son during the pandemic. And one of the things we did was we also asked families if they would like to provide a photograph of themselves and what they were doing during the pandemic. And this is one that was provided of this father and son out, in little verbal description. They're outdoors. It's very cold out because they're wearing warm coats with camouflage. They have camouflage masks on and baseball caps, and the leaves are down, so it's cold. And they're out hunting together. And that's one of the things we noticed time after time is that people were returning to traditional activities, whether it be hunting, whether it be basket making, whether it be canoeing and things like that. And the healing that comes through returning to those traditional arts. And before I start this, I'm going to start this with a piece of artwork. And before I do that, I just want to say that this image is not in the exhibit, but I did ask for permission to use this image. And okay, this is The Witness Tree by Judy Dow. And it's a blue fiber piece with pieces that are sewn down on it. And this is like the opposite of that eugenics tree we looked at earlier on the poster. And so there's a banner across it that says anti-eugenics. And embroidered into it is anti-eugenics is the collective creation of equitable and a healthy world for all. Like a tree, anti-eugenics draws from many sources and transforms them into a one mind and one heart way of being. And then when we look at this tree, when we take a closer look and we look into the roots of the tree down at the bottom, instead of hearing those colder words that are disciplines, there are different types of words in here, which I can't read all of them from this distance, but I can see education and trust and love and found, truth, and words like that. So I'm using this piece of artwork to kind of transition into this section on healing. This, Judy Dow created a series of these pieces that traveled around the world for quite some time. And it in itself, as it traveled, brought healing with it. And it even went out toward the Ukraine and stuff while the war was sort of brewing and starting and stuff like that. There's the quote. Initially, I didn't know if that artwork was going to be in this slideshow. I got permission for it literally while I was here. So that's why the quote is there. And also, the Vermont Abenaki Artists Association teamed up and partnered with the Abenaki Arts and Education Center to provide healing through the arts programs that bring traditional arts and skills back into the Abenaki community, because there are some skills that we have very few practitioners of. So we had master artists come and work with people of all different ages, from teeny tiny to just about any age you can imagine. And we also had 2 social workers involved that were Indigenous. And one was Pequot Shawnee and the other was Abenaki. So if people started having feelings that they needed to work through while they were making this art and while we were having these conversations, and these sessions also included storytelling and ceremony that we won't even talk about. But the important thing was not just the art, but there were people to work through their feelings with, which was really important. And you can see some of the arts and crafts supplies on one of the slides. There's an advertisement for it that has a picture of Birch Bark House, and you can sort of look at what we were doing. We weren't just doing the art form, but people also had the opportunities to go out and harvest. And there are these new publications that have come out recently that contain a lot of content from our recognition applications, or petitions if you prefer. If you're interested in seeing what might be in those books, I have some copies up here. And resources. If you are looking for resources to read, get out your cell phone and take a picture of the next few slides. I'm going to leave this up so you can, for just a moment, so you can take pictures. Reclaiming the Ancestors, Firsting and Lasting New England Indians Out of Existence, the Identity of the St. Francis Indians, Western Abenakis of Vermont, Voice of the Dawn, Our Beloved Kin, Vermont for Vermonters, Breeding Better Vermonters. And when everybody's done taking their picture, I'm going to keep your phones out. I have QR codes. If you don't know how to use a QR code, what you do is you have your camera on and point it at the QR code, which is the square box on the screen. And this slide is I referenced the Truth and Reconciliation Committee having that emblematic session. If you want to see the slides and read the material, see the material for yourself, follow this QR code. You hold your phone up to the QR code, and it'll capture the website encoded in that little box, and you just press to follow the link. I'm looking to see if people are done taking pictures of that before I go to the next one. It's nice. Thank you for taking your cameras out and wanting to learn more. Oh, I'm sorry, did I change it too quick? Okay, this next one is actually a press conference held by the Vermont Abenaki Alliance calling for tolerance from the Vermont community. And if you follow this link to YouTube, in the description, there are also a bunch of the handouts that were given out that day. I see a couple more pictures are still being taken. Okay, almost done. Okay. Tell me when. Can I change the slide? Okay. And thank you so much for everybody that came out tonight. Here's the website for the Abenaki Artists Association. If you're interested in learning more about us, we have a Facebook, an Instagram, and there's my email address. I'm going to stay here for a couple minutes. I don't know if we still have time for questions. I'm happy to answer a couple of questions. Also, the artist for the witness tree is here, and if they feel like coming up and talking about it, they can. I know, I had to take off my jacket. It's pretty hot up here.
Right? I know, who would be surprised we almost hit 70 today, right?
I know.
October.
And the projector gives you an extra 20 degrees.
Right? And so thank you again for this presentation and sharing these stories with us, a lot of them very personal. I'll just remind folks, if you do have questions, please write them on the note cards and we can collect those at the sides as I'll be going through kind of some of our questions here. And kind of like our first question, kind of looking at this, is understanding kind of like the legal status of Vermont, the Abenaki representation. How does that compare with other states with their recognition?
Oh, that's a really great question. So actually, Vermont has one of the most stringent state recognition criteria. So if you're looking across state-recognized tribes, it is among the most stringent, and it's multifaceted. And it's also transparent. If you want to see what it looks like, you can go to the Vermont Commission on Native American Affairs website and read the criteria for yourself. It includes, the petitions include many different disciplines, including genealogy, which is interesting because we were just talking about eugenics. And so those petitions also included genealogy sections that had to be, and the petitions on genealogy had to be confirmed by independent scholars and stuff long before it progressed through to the state level and it had to be voted on 3 times, and then after that it had to go to the governor to sign off on. So it wasn't a quick process and it wasn't an easy process.
Thank you. And then another question we have is, knowing kind of like the relationships between different tribes, is there any history between the Abenaki and the Mohawk people?
Oh, another fantastic question. Yes, absolutely. So they're just on the other side of the lake. So yes, of course. There's relationship, sometimes better, sometimes worse. But one of the most interesting things that strikes me is, and I'm going to come here so I can see you all a little bit better. Otherwise, I'm just looking at my own screen. So one of the things that I think is very amazing, I remember hearing when I was younger in history, hearing about war in this region between different Native American tribes, right? And then as I started getting older and doing research and looking into the regional history more through firsthand accounts, it was very interesting because I knew, well, I had heard stories, but then as an adult done research that confirmed oral history stories that in addition to the mission up at Odanak, there was also a mission in the Kawasuk territory called Mission Delu, and there was another mission at Missisquoi. So I'm talking about Jesuit missions where Native American people would go to for their sacraments and stuff like that. And in history, I learned, when I was younger, I had learned mostly about when Odanak was raided and burned. And I never heard what happened to the other two missions. So the other two missions were also burned. Everything was destroyed, but they were never rebuilt, which is different than Odanak. And during that period, when these attacks happened, people actually moved in with the Mohawk community. So there are a lot of Abenaki people that are married into Mohawk families, and there are a lot of family jokes that go along with that in different families and stuff like that. So yes, there is a long-standing relationship between the Abenaki and the Mohawk people. And there are people over there that still know they're Abenaki, or Abenaki Mohawk. And identity is very personal and complex. So how everybody's relationships with their ancestors is kind of like they navigate that on their own. But that's kind of a cool thing to know that your neighbors would take you in if anything horrible happened.
And one final question we have, let me just make sure I get here for the online folks.
Sure.
Is referencing the Leahy Center display that is scheduled, and just wondering if there's a specific time for that or if there's plans for it to be a permanent installation.
I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for that.
No worries.
I can find out and send you information
Great.
that you can post, perhaps.
Okay, thank you. And just kind of like a final question, I think, to wrap up is if people want to learn more, how can they get involved with the Vermont Abenaki Artists Association?
Yes, of course. So right behind me, you have all of my contact information. And if you're on Facebook, we have Vermont Abenaki Artists Association on Facebook, and we also have an Instagram page. So follow us on those so you know what kind of events we have going on. We have a speaker series that's been going on throughout the year. This fall session is supported in part by Vermont Humanities, and there have been some really great sessions. The theme is Bridging Perspectives, Indigenous Identity, Narratives, and Healing. So there have been topics on like who is Indian and what does the law say, and there was another session just on Abenaki hunting and fishing traditions that are specific to this region. There was another session, Marge Burchek just did a session on reconsidering the history of the region, and where she was showing documentation and maps and things that were that aren't commonly shared as part of one of her projects that she's working on. So you can follow those things, come to sessions. And we also have an Abenaki Heritage Weekend, the third week of June every year at Lake Champlain Maritime Museum. Everybody's invited, and we made it free, so there are no barriers to coming. Come meet Abenaki people from all over the place. We have people from Vermont, from New Hampshire, from Massachusetts. We have people come down sometimes from Canada too. So it's a great place to see presentations, but also talk to the presenters after they're done, hear music, storytelling, and things like that. It's pretty cool. And our exhibits, of course. Thank you so much.
No, just thank you so much. We really appreciate your time today. And then just another thank you to the Brownell Library for hosting us and Media Factory for producing the live stream. Hope you all had a great evening, and thank you again for coming.